In 1850, there was an enormous fire here in the church which destroyed everything. The ceiling and the roof collapsed. All of the interior of the church was lost in that fire. Fortunately, they managed to raise the money quite quickly to restore the church under the architect Philip Hardwick. And it was Hardwick who commissioned the artist Charles Clutterbuck to produce the east window that we now have, which is the depiction of the crucifixion of Christ, Christ surrounded by the two thieves, Mary Magdalene at the base, and a number of Roman centurions. If you look at our window, it has the feel of a major, perhaps pre-Raphaelite or Renaissance painting. Fairly large panes of glass, lots of perspective there, as distinct from the neo-Gothic style, which was more mosaic and pretty flat. The glass itself, quite special. These were coloured glass, but overlaid with some fine enamelled brushwork to bring out the design. So after 170 years of being in situ here, the Clutterbuck today is in pretty poor condition. There are all sorts of problems, that the lovely vivid colours of the original Clutterbuck are really obscured by all of that grime and dirt. It's even worse on the outside with all the pollution from the commercial road. And then the other factor is the sheer weight of this massive 200 square foot window is bearing down on these bottom panes. So behind me here, you see bowing and buckling of the leading as the pressure has pushed down on the bottom panes. And we have a number of actually holes in the glass as well. We've spent the last 4 years raising the money to send the Clutterbuck window for full restoration and conservation. Through a major fundraising exercise, a lot of generous members of the congregation, local community, stepped up to sponsor individual panes, and we've added to that with some grant makers as well. With that money, we are able to send it to a specialist studio, the Keith Barley Studio in Yorkshire, and that is about to happen in a couple of weeks, and we are so grateful we finally got to the end of the road.
My name's Keith Barley. I started my career in stained glass in 1967. I was the very first apprentice of the York Glaziers Trust at York Minster. And then 50 years ago, in 1973, started my own business. It's been a period over the last 50 years. I started originally working from home, then the full premises, and then we've expanded into this purposely designed studio for the conservation and restoration and creation of new stained glass windows. The window from Limehouse certainly was an ambitious window. There's about 200 square feet of opening in this window. You can imagine it being like a large sail on a boat, so the wind pressures and everything else must have been incredible. We had a large 10-foot table in here. They were flattened, and also fractured leads, especially around the perimeters, were strengthened to actually be able to manhandle the panels safely. Compared with other windows, as you can probably see here, you know, this window is roughly the same width as one of the panels from Limehouse is in height. In its vertical situation, we'd have a bar here, one there, and another one at its division down there. So we're having bars roughly every 12 inches for something of this scale. And the Limehouse window, the way it was constructed, was 10 foot wide by 18 inches tall, each panel. If you imagine turning it vertically, you want that amount of structure coming down it horizontally. And at the moment, the only support it has across that 10-foot width is 2 bars. So that makes each particular section being 18 inches tall by just over 3 foot wide without any support at all.
So when we're working on historic windows, such as the east window from St Anne's Church in Limehouse, one of the first things we do is record the condition of the window as it arrives with us in the studio. So we do two things. We photograph the window with light coming through it, transmitted light as it is in the building, and we also photograph it in reflected light, so with light shining onto the glass, and that helps us see a lot more about the condition of the surfaces, particularly the painted side, the inside of the glass. And that is this small section up to here. So it's that first panel, but just half of it. That's the other half of the bottom panel. Here we have this section. And if I zoom in, again, you can see on here where there's fractures in the glass. Here and there and here. So we're able to tell a lot from the photograph. You can also see where there are gaps around this piece, and this piece here is actually a previous repair. Even from the photographs, we can start to tell a lot about the condition that the window is in. This, see all the surface and all the material here is all dirt that really shouldn't be there.
Here in the green, just above his shoe, there's one going right the way down to. The next stage will be to do the conservation treatments, that's cleaning, edge bonding and repair of structural damage, the removal of mending leads, etc. One of our easiest things to do is where somebody has put on what we call a strap lead. This is a piece of lead without the heart. Now this strap lead overlaps yet another lead here. So one underneath and one on the top. We'll be able to take these off, and then that leaves this piece of putty which is now hardened. That's one piece of glass. That would have been another piece of glass, and this another piece of glass. It has then subsequently got broken and had this excess leading put on, and now it's been made into 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. So we're getting back to the shape of Clutterbuck's original design. So it's easy to remove the lead. However, this particular area is the linseed oil putty, which is set quite hard. Sometimes it will be able to remove it quite easily. But because the window no longer needs to be waterproof, we can remove these mending leads and just leave the cracks. We've done some trials on these two pieces, but we're left with the third part of the toe, and as you can see, the toenail has been cut off with the leaded light cement, this waterproofing cement, which should be along this line and along that line. So first of all, we need to remove this, and I can come without touching the surface of the glass along the edge of the lead, and you can see here this large piece of cement from that corner. And then on this surface we've got this, we don't know exactly what it is yet, but for the sake of this we'll call it a blackout paint. This is nothing to do with the glass painter's paint. It is a deposit on the surface. It's a shaving action, so you're not scratching. You can actually remove this with your fingernail. It is so soft. So for the first time in years, we can now see the big toe and its joining friend. We'll be selecting a suitable area to actually run from the top to the bottom. So it won't be seen, it'll be hidden by the actual existing leading. We would be soldering at these points onto the soldered joints, right the way from the top to the bottom, and then these will be soldered and attached to the actual frame which is going around the perimeter of the window. We removed these for safety when we were taking the window out. For instance, the piece of yellow, it was so badly broken here that somebody had just held the fragment in place with just putty, just literally putty. So we've set that to one side, and then when we glue this together, this will be reunited with its friends. This piece here isn't original to Clutterbuck. This is a repair that somebody's put in, but they didn't have their piece of glass big enough, so that then they've cut another piece. So that piece was just put into there and filled with putty with no lead at all. This is the Clutterbuck red. That is a lighter piece. This is probably a little bit thicker and a little bit darker. This is the mid-tone of it, but it's all the same colour. The only difference is the thickness of the piece of red flash on the surface. Here we have some more reds. This one's still quite acidy, quite bright, but this one is looking pretty good for down here as well. I would propose that we'll do a new piece because this piece doesn't even fit the original shape. So we need to identify some red glasses that are within this range and have a look at them with some paint pigment on to try and... In this area here, can you see this foliated scroll work coming down? It comes to here and it's gone. Now we have that piece of glass, that shape. When we fold the leads back, that will fit into this shape here. As his torso comes down, we've got his waistband here, this blue robe, and then he has this sort of red cape coming down the back, which folds over the top of his leg. So he's got a covering over his knee up to his calf. And we've got his shoe and his toe pointing that way. So we've got this part of, you can see the same relationship between the yellows and the toe poking here. And then this leg is down and his toe is pointing backwards in that direction. And then Helen will paint this piece of glass following this design lines down.
My name is Helen Whittaker and I'm Creative Director of Barley Studio. I am going to be involved in the restoration painting of the project. When we get the glass coming to us as a colour, we then apply pigment to it, such as you see here, which is like a brown pigment that's applied to the glass. So there are details actually on the Limehouse window which will need a fine brush to create the patterned effect that you see here. And then there's what we call the shading, which is the overlay of pigment onto the surface of the glass. And that will kind of darken it down. So if we do cut a new piece of blue glass or red, we'll need to patina it down with this pigment so that it blends in with all the original glass. I've added the iron oxide, which is a glass pigment, a grisaille pigment, which traditionally is brown. So there's variations of brown which we're going to match up to the Limehouse glass in front of us. And I've covered the whole glass with a matte. So that's a layer of pigment that's actually on the red glass. And then I've used a badger brush, which is a traditional method of painting, which actually when the pigment's applied, it produces a really smooth, flat layer of pigment. So I'm going to replicate that by scratching through the pigment layer as it's unfired pigment to replicate the pattern that surrounds it on the existing glass pieces. Once the pigment's been applied and you've got the desired effect, which follows through with the original pieces here, the piece is then taken through to a gas kiln. The heat comes to the surface of the glass and actually fuses the pigment onto the surface at around 650 degrees centigrade. And then the glass is removed from the kiln, cooled down, and then it's placed back within the original lead matrix.